Alright, in this video we're going to review how to use while loops in MATLAB. Alright, so what is a while loop? So while loop is one of two programming constructs that allow you to repeat code over and over again. Okay, it's while loops and for loops, but unlike for loops, for loops are known to repeat a set number of times. While loops continue to repeat until it's told to stop, basically, until a stopping condition is fulfilled. And the way it does this is through a Boolean expression. And so a Boolean expression is used to control, whether the while loop either continues or stops, right? So remember, a Boolean expression either returns true or false. And as long as that Boolean expression continues to be true, then the while loop will continue to repeat, okay? And so, people think of it as something different, but I like to think of it as almost like a repeated if statement where it kind of continuously checks the Boolean and keeps running until that's false, right? And so here's kind of the kind of a visual representation of what happens with the while loop, right? And so the first, it checks the condition, and so if that condition is true, then we enter into the while loop. But if that condition is false right away, then we don't even actually execute anything. Then we just move on to the exit of the loop, okay? But if that's true, then we go ahead and execute the loop body. So that's all the code that's inside. And then after we execute that, we get to the end of the loop, we check the condition again. So this condition and this condition are the same. And so if that is continuing, if that's still true, then we just go back and execute the loop body one more time. Okay, and so it keeps doing this until the condition is false. And then if it's false, then we exit the loop. Okay, and so here's what it looks like in code. And so it's very simple code. So we use the keyword while. And then while is then followed by the Boolean expression, right? Remember, the Boolean expression is going to be either true or false depending on what's going on. And then we do stuff, and then that's the code body, okay? And so I like to call this the stopping condition because this is kind of what's keeping the while loop going. And so as long as this continues to be true, the loop will continue to iterate. Okay, so let's look at a more concrete example. One that you're probably going to use. This is probably, I think, one of the most common applications of a while loop, and that's reading a file. Okay, and so here we have a file. We have a file called filey.mcfileface, right? And we want to read this in order to get some data from it, right? The problem is, when we're running this program, we don't know how many lines of data are in this file, right? So maybe we generated this file through an experiment or something, and we need to read it in to do our computations. And so since we don't know how many lines are in the file, we use a while loop for this. And so we say while we're not at the end of the file, right? So that's what this Boolean expression is. Okay, and so as long as there's still lines remaining, we're going to keep reading lines. Okay, and so what this code is going to do is that it's going to get the next line and then check and see what the next line is. Okay, and so if there's nothing left, then we exit the loop. But as long as there's still lines remaining to be read in the file, we're going to keep repeating this, until we reach the end. And so that's I'd say a fairly common example of a while loop that you'll see, quite a lot. Okay, and so while loops are great because they can be very flexible, and a lot of times you don't know how many times you need to loop. But at the same time, with great power comes great responsibility, as the great Uncle Ben used to say. And so, because the while loops will continue to iterate, if you have a situation where your Boolean expression will never return false, right? Then your while loop will just continue to run forever because there's no way it can return false. Okay, and so you need to be really careful when using while loops. And so it's not the same as for loops. And so when you're writing a program that uses while, you always want to ask yourself, like, is it possible for this loop to exit on its own? Okay, and so I have an example here of an infinite loop. And so we have a while loop. So we have while n is greater than 0. We're going to keep this loop going. Okay, where n is this variable right here. The problem is we're never going to get a situation where n is less than 0 because each time the loop iterates, the value of n is going to be increasing, right? And so that's what this line of code does, is that it increases the value of n by 1, okay? But if n keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, there's no way for n to be less than 0 here. And so this condition here is never going to be false, and we end up with an infinite loop, and this program is just going to crash your computer, okay? And so if you do think that you're in a situation like this, say that you're writing a big program and it's been running for a while, you can go to the MATLAB terminal and hit Control-C, and it might take a couple seconds, but that's kind of the hotkey there that's used to kill your program. Okay, but generally you don't want to get to this point. You want to make sure you write your code so that you don't get an infinite loop to begin with. Okay, Um, and because the while loop is relatively unpredictable compared to for loops, we have some additional control statements that we can use to kind of manipulate how the loop operates. Okay, and so the first is called a break statement. And so a break statement is a keyword that's used to force the loop to exit. Okay, and so if you're in a while loop and the code reads a break, then it knows that no matter what, no matter if the Boolean statement continues to be true, then we're going to just exit the loop. Okay, so this is kind of a good fail-safe that you can include to just make sure that your loop exits eventually. Okay. The next keyword that we have is continue, and so what this does is that it tells the code to ignore the rest of the body of the loop, but instead of breaking out of it like the break statement does, it just returns back to the top of the loop. Okay, and so the way you can read that is, we're going to continue on with the rest with the next loop iteration. Okay, and so here's an example that kind of shows both of those in action. Okay, so here, first thing you'll notice right away, we have while true, right? And so just by definition, true is never going to equal false, and so what we set up here is an infinite loop. Okay, and so unless we do something with break, unless we see a break in here, there's no way for this loop to exit on its own. Okay, and so this is very poor. First of all, let me say this is very poor programming practice. You never want to do while true, but this is just an illustrative example. Okay, but this is you typically never want to do this. All right, so what the code's going to do is that it's going to sample a random integer, okay, and so it's going to get a random integer between 1 and 100, okay? And then first thing it's going to do is it's going to check and see if the integer is less than 10, okay? If it's less than 10, then we continue, right? So remember, continue, what that does is that it ignores the rest of the loop body, at least for this, only for this iteration, okay? And then it just returns back to the top of the loop, okay? Next, we display the whatever that integer was, okay? And notice that since this is after the continue, we're only going to display the number if it's greater than or equal to 10, right? Because if it's less than 10, then we hit the continue, and then we don't even reach this part of the code, okay? And so if you want to type this in, you can see the outputs. I didn't include it just because it's kind of a lot of outputs. Then you'll see that the only numbers that are displayed are greater than or equal to 10, okay? And then finally, we reach the break statement. And so the break only occurs if the number that we reach is 24. Okay, so we have about a 1% chance each time to break out of a loop. Right? Okay, so when do we want to use while loops? And so while loops are used to repeat code just like for loops, but it's primarily used for cases when you don't know how many times you need to repeat it. Okay, and so some common examples of this is reading files. You don't know how long the file is. Maybe you're writing an interactive program that requires the user to input something, and so you want to continue to wait until the user maybe submits a valid input. Okay, and there's also numerical algorithms out there that rely on randomness, right? And so if there's any kind of randomness involved, you don't really know how many times you need to do something, and so you can use a while loop to repeat code in that case.